Good morning. It's Sunday morning, and I'm here with a Sunday thought. I must apologize for not being here last Sunday. And as you can tell, my voice is still husky. Excuse me just a sec. I didn't have a voice last Sunday. So that's what happens when you have a lot of, what do you call it, when they freeze your jaw from this dental work that I had to endure. Anyway, we're back on track, at least for the next few weeks when I have to go through this again in a certain way. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about acceptance and flexibility. I'm known for talking about acceptance. It's a word that comes up quite often in my various shows, probably the longer ones than this one. But acceptance is really accepting things as they are and then deciding what you want to do with it. But because a lot of us are stubborn or we're set, want it our way, whichever way you want to look at it, we actually are not accepting of what is. And when we accept what is, we are then able to work with what we can create or work. But there is another word. And actually, I was just looking through one of my little books I wrote called Secrets for Living Happily. And it's right in the last chapter. It talks about acceptance and flexibility. And basically, it says, see, I'm still having trouble with my mouth, never mind my voice. Flexibility is when you let go of preconceived ideas, thereby restricting yourself. By trusting yourself, by accepting and listening to you, you can choose to be flexible. I think these two things I probably had the most difficulty with over in life, just generally in relationships or creating what I wanted. I could accept. I came fairly easily, but flexibility, it's kind of like those of us that have a stubborn streak. We don't always recognize them. We don't see them as we're being stubborn, or we're not listening to the other person, or we are stuck on what we want and we can't see why we can't have that or have it that a certain way. And so consequently, we are not flexible. And very often we'll be told, you're just stubborn, or there's other words that can be used, but I'll just use the stubborn one. Put your foot in the ground. Sometimes I used to feel like my heels were stuck and I was being pulled in a direction I didn't want to go. But what you were looking for is the end result where you are happy and contented with your life. And if you have these, we'll call them arguments, sometimes they represent as arguments, or other ways where life isn't smooth. One of the things to look at, am I flexible? Oh, we can have a lot of excuses why we're not, especially if you're in the metaphysical field. I mean, I can just say, well, you just take a look at my astrology chart and you will see that I'm a little stubborn. A little is taking it fairly stubborn. Or I can say, oh, my numbers say I'm this or that or the other. It really comes down to it. What makes you happy? What is it brings about the happiness inside, not only with you, but the people around you, your relationships, people that work with you, etc. I know I've worked with some people and it's like they're miserable and you wonder where on earth why do they bother getting up? They're just miserable. They don't accept things. They are certainly not flexible, but they're stuck in whatever they conceive of as this is how things should be. And that word should comes with highlighted. Should. Who says something should be a certain way? And when we're raised certain ways, we end up with that. We end up with that. This is how it should be, or this is how it should work, or this is the way you should live. But life isn't always like that. I was thinking this morning as I was contemplating on, just because I never know what I'm really going to say, but contemplating on kind of what I could say. I was thinking there's a phrase I heard once was, if life serves you up lemons, make lemonade. And it took me quite a while, way back there, when I to thought about what that really meant. And as I wasn't a lemonade maker per se, it was like it took me a while. But then I began to realize that it's like a card metaphor. Whatever the cards are dealt, what's dealt in front of you is what you need to deal with. This is where the acceptance comes in. We need to accept what is, because a lot of times life deals us up lemons. It deals up situations, and you go, first of all, what did I do to deserve this? Or what am I supposed to do with this? What am I supposed to create? How am I supposed to work with this? Because it is like you're usually raised with a set of parameters. And then all of a sudden you're dealt with these other things that don't fit into the framework of which you were raised. And very often that's where it really comes in. In other words, if it's something that you're familiar with, something that you're used to, or something that makes sense to your mythology, not so bad. But when it's something that's coming out of left field, and for a person like myself who left one culture to come to another culture, fairly young, and dealing with all the things that go on in a different culture, it was like having to like blink 3 times and what? Where does that fit in? And so you learn how to create flexibility, number one, but you accept, okay, this is how this is done. In this family, this is done this way. Nothing like your family. In this work situation, it's happened this way. So what happens is you expand the expectation. Underneath all this deal of acceptance is what's your expectation? What are you expecting? And a lot of that in the first place comes from your childhood. What are your expectations? What were you given? What were you brought forward? So by accepting, what begins to happen is that you begin to perceive things and you open up and you become accepting. Okay, that's the first step. So you accept, so this is the rules. This is how it works. This is what's expected of you. And then you choose whether you're going to meet those expectations or not. But then there's this other level. How flexible are you? How are you able to let go of the constraints that make your world safe and secure? How are you going to deal with a total different idea? I was fortunate, and as I was teaching metaphysics, tarot in particular, I was getting students from all sorts of spiritual backgrounds. Muslims, Sikhs, some people that didn't even have any idea of anything, strong Christian. So there was lots of ideas that came, you might say, through my world. And it taught me a lot about not making judgments, being accepting and flexible, because at the bottom line of everything of what I was teaching and what each philosophy says is love, and love is acceptance as well as forgiveness. So I don't talk much about forgiveness, but it's really high on the chart of happiness and success. Because when you're rigid, think about it, when you get really rigid and you tighten up, what moves? What changes? And often we have people who are raised with specific ideas. And I've always welcomed people from all sorts of different varieties of life over the years that came to study with me. And having them to deal and cope with what they had been raised with. And here was me giving a whole different concept, whole different perceptions, whole different words. Now, I had years assimilating all that. And then all of a sudden, people were having to confront so many different perspectives, so many different ideas for that in their, quote, I'm going to just put the hype in brackets, their religion, where they have been raised, and they're just working to expand the sense of themselves. it was very, very enlightening at times because sometimes people couldn't really let go. And a lot of it had to do with family influence. But mostly I found if you just kept things very open and they just taught the basics, which basically isn't, I think, everywhere, is that they began to work and appreciate. I also want to say that the majority of the different religions that passed through me were women, not the men. Their men are very, very, this is how it is. But the women wanted to know more, wanted to be aware, and they utilized what they learned to help them cope, handle, and deal with their culture, because that is their culture. What, and look around and think about that. What is your culture? What is it that you deal with? What are you accepting and what you're not? Because if you're not accepting, if you're just saying I don't want anything to do with that, what means is that you're not dealing with it effectively. It's better to accept it and just say that's not for me than resist. When you resist, what is there? When you resist, it persists. That's on one of those little slogans. But the main thing here, because as I said, I've talked a lot about acceptance of things as they are, is flexibility, to be flexible in the solutions, to be flexible, to listen to others, to see how they perceive things and what they think their solutions are. All of that becomes very important. I deal a lot with, and through, especially through the readings more than anything probably, as being given problems that people have and they're helping and they want me to help them resolve them. And a lot of it is just looking and seeing and then having a bigger or different perception than what maybe they're having in their day to day. So that's my Sunday thought. I'm glad to be back and I have a voice again, and not a really, really sore mouth, although I think it's 2 weeks time. Or maybe it's 3. I'm back in having more stuff done. Anyway, you have a great day, and enjoy. Be accepting, but also be flexible. Bye now. Wish you well. And Yvonne, good morning to you. Yes, blessed are the flexible. When stressed, they won't break. No, they just bend. See you. Bye-bye.